Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and today's episode contains some minor spoilers and some background information from the first 3 episodes of the Andor series. Which, if you guys haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. I don't get excited about Star Wars stuff that often anymore, but this is definitely one of the best openings of any Star Wars TV show ever. So the Andor series starts off small. The first scene takes place on Morlana 1 in the Preox Morlana corporate zone. There's no Empire here, not really, and there definitely isn't any rebellion. You almost forget for a second that this show takes place in the Star Wars universe for a second, which is exciting in a lot of ways. It reminds us just how massive and full of adventure this galaxy can be. Now, the struggle between Cassian Andor and the Preox Morlana Authority, the main antagonist in the first few episodes, might not register that much on the galactic scale. These guys aren't even Imperials, but man, their dedication to duty.
Have you modified your uniform?
Perhaps slightly. Pockets piping and some light tailoring.
And enthusiasm for oppressing the little guy and using a little bit of lethal force every now and then.
So one suspect. How many men do you think we need?
I'll say 12, son.
And the fact that they all kind of look like slightly alcoholic blueberries is what really makes me love this faction. No, seriously, this is like one of my favorite antagonistic organizations in Star Wars. So much better than the more flaccid Inquisitorius, who are all show and no substance. I think I just don't like Force users, honestly. I mean, I like Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's my guy. But anyway, in today's video, I want to take a deeper look at this villainous organization. And I want to take a look at how it started, or how it fits into the wider galaxy, and how it relates to the Galactic Empire. Corporate powers have always played an incredibly important role in the expansion and development of the Star Wars galaxy, especially in the Mid and Outer Rim territories. The worlds that we see in the first few episodes, Morlana 1 and Preox, are both located in the free trade sector. This is most likely related somehow to the free trade zone, which was established by the Galactic Republic. More than a century before the Clone Wars began, the Galactic Senate in 124 BBY approved the creation of the first free trade zone. These were an attempt to economically jumpstart entire regions of the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim. These worlds were extremely stagnant and politically isolated from the rest of the galaxy. There weren't any large population centers, which meant that there weren't people to tax, and without tax revenue, you can't really provide proper services to these areas. And the Galactic Republic, which had been demilitarized for almost 900 years by this point since the Ruusan Reformation, lacked a federal military, so they couldn't even secure the area from bandits and pirates. And when you have bandits and pirates constantly raiding a territory, no one is really stupid enough to invest their money in those areas. The federal government was gridlocked and internally focused also, especially on issues concerning the powerful core worlds where the majority of the political powers were centered. The fact that they even cared and passed this Outer Rim focused free trade zone kind of legislation is actually a miracle on its own. It's the most these people living on the fringes of the galaxy would ever get. Forget about actual investment services and security. Instead, the Republic would rely solely on the free market and the corporate powers to develop these areas by removing all tariffs, corporate taxes, and even regulations from these areas. Which also meant that they could now create their own private security forces to secure these places, which will cause huge problems later on. Now, you might be thinking, hey Alan, we have special economic zones here on Earth. They seem pretty harmless and standard. But no guys, we're talking about Star Wars here, and they scale up everything to an extremely crazy extent. Most of the special economic zones you're thinking about here on Earth, like Hong Kong or let's say New Jersey's urban enterprise zones, are just areas where there are some minor benefits like lower sales taxes or reduced regulation. But these special economic zones are still beholden to federal laws and political influence. They weren't completely isolated in their own area where you could basically do whatever you wanted. In the Galactic Republic, the free trade zone is literally a lawless area where you can effectively get away with anything, including and up to price fixing, prostitution, drug smuggling, shenanigans with wild animals, prostitution with animals, slavery, or a combination of all those things put together. It's wild. Heck, you can even set up your own fiefdom, essentially. Just make sure that in the rare case a judiciary ship or some sneaky Jedi does come out to check out your territory, things aren't too blatantly messed up and out in the open. You gotta like zone things into red light districts, you degenerates, okay? So basically the Republic made 2 major mistakes when they established the free trade zone. One, they had no real way to enforce their will on these corpos once they gave them complete free reign. Essentially, these companies, ranging from the Techno Union to the Trade Federation to the Corporate Alliance and so on, all set up their own raw resource gathering operations, manufacturing and heavy industry operations, and began to churn out goods and products that cost just a fraction of what companies sold things for in the core region. And they had also private armies to enforce things. There were no labor laws, no environmental regulations, no taxes or tariffs. This gave them a huge competitive advantage. It also began to make life harder for their core world competitors, which ultimately would affect their employees. Yes, the parallels here to our own struggles with the globalization of the supply chains are very, very noticeable. Thank you, George Lucas. This added to the overall unrest that was shimmering all across the galaxy because the Republic was also gridlocked with bureaucracy that was unable to carry out the necessary reforms to keep up with all of this economic change and growth. And as you guys all know, there's a tyranny to bureaucracy that can drive a man completely crazy in the same way authoritarianism will. The second massive mistake that the Republic made was to never place an expiration date on the free trade zone when they set it up. And so the corpos never planned or thought about the possibility that their ultimate reign and power would eventually be taken away from them. By all intents and purposes, in 32 BBY, when the Galactic Senate passed Prop 31814D, making the free trade zone eligible for taxation, this was akin to declaring war on the corporations as far as they were concerned. And so for the next 10 years, the Separatist crisis would bubble just below the surface and finally explode in the Republic's face in 22 BBY with the beginning of the Clone Wars. Now, we don't know exactly where the free trade sector, where Morlana 1 and the Morlana Authority are located. It's very possible that it has nothing to do with the free trade zone because, again, all of this is relatively new. And the free trade zone itself was actually massive and covered most of the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim, whereas the free trade sector was a sector, and sectors are relatively small and only encompass a few different planetary systems and planets. Generally, most sectors had one senator representing the entire area. Now, there seems to be a really big concerted effort by the showmakers of Andor to make everything in the series relatively new and unconnected from all that previous baggage. So again, we don't know exactly where this corporate authority is. It's all completely new. But since I have like over 10,000 hours of Star Wars lore research abilities, I'm going to take a shot at this, and I'm going to guess that this area is actually located in what was formerly known as the corporate sector. This was an area of the galaxy famous for its ruthless corporate entities which established their own fiefdoms, as we talked about before. It's also quite close to the Separatist heartland. We know that Cassian Andor probably spent his early years in this area, and he also apparently fought for the Separatist cause. But what we do know for certain is the following. The Preox Morlana Authority is aligned with the Galactic Empire, and their security forces keep order in the area on behalf of the Empire. Chief Inspector Hine was set to attend an Imperial Regional Command review and had to report crime rates back to Central Command. He also mentions the Deputy Inspector Cyril Karn, who I will from now on call Deputy Inspector Frag because he's the kind of guy who will get blown up by a detonator by his own men the second he turns his back on them. Anyway, the Chief Inspector tells the Deputy Inspector that it's better for the Empire to think that the Pre-Mor security team has things under control because an Imperial intervention would be bad for everyone, including the security forces there. Which shows us that the Preox Morlana Authority will only have their authority so as long as they can prove that they can keep things relatively stable and continue to do their job, which is most likely to secure cheap raw materials and manufacturing power for the Empire. To further emphasize how closely aligned the Preox Morlana Authority is to the Empire, well, we have Sergeant Tactical Blueberry saying the following.
Corporate tactical forces are the Empire's first line of defense, and the best way to keep the blade sharp is to use it.
Dude, I freaking love that guy. He is so ready to just crush rebel skulls. As a matter of fact, Deputy Inspector Frag and Sergeant Tactical Blueberry are already two of my favorite villains in all of Star Wars. Their combined excitement for law enforcement and shoving their boots up people's behinds is infectious. I really hope they don't die. I mean, all signs indicate that they will die gruesome deaths. I mean, for all you kiddies out there, Sergeant Tactical Blueberry isn't just sunburnt in the face here. He's constantly gazeboed on the job, which we see later on as he's drinking a flask while holding an assault blaster in one hand. Not a good idea. I mean, when I look at Sergeant Tactical Blueberry's face, I get that same feeling, spoiler alert, I get that same feeling I got when I saw Tim's goofy looking face for the first time. I knew he was gonna die. I knew he was gonna die because of Bex, because the Tims of the world, like Bob from Stranger Things, the simple, nice guy with the average looks who will do everything for a smoking hot girl, will always die because of that smoking hot girl. So, gents, tonight, pour one out for the Tims and the Bobs of the world, okay? What are we talking about? Oh yes, the point is the Preox Authority are basically the Imperial equivalent of a local planetary defense force, kind of like how Naboo had their own PDF fighting against the Trade Federation. Or maybe a better example would be the Imperial Aligned Mining Guild and its security forces, which even piloted TIE fighters. It makes sense that such local authorities would exist. I mean, the Empire wasn't all that different from the Republic. Neither federal government really had the resources to police every individual sector, nor would that be efficient. You really do need localized policing. Except in Imperial times, things kind of changed drastically all over the galaxy when it came to the makeup of these local governments. From the very beginning, Darth Sidious's master, the Mune Darth Plagueis, was involved in business and the finance world. His father was a mid-ranking intergalactic banking clan agent, and when Darth Plagueis got to an adult age, he basically took over the family business. He also murdered his entire family, as was custom for Sith Lords. Plagueis was quite different from other Sith Lords. He was a very ruthless individual, but he also kept his emotions relatively in check and was a very pragmatic individual. Plagueis quickly understood that the tremendously robust capitalist society the Republic had built could not be defeated by conventional means. Plagueis was, for all intents and purposes, a freaking enlightened monocle-wearing capitalist, and his ability to understand how the Republic worked made the other previous Sith Lords who tried to take on the Jedi look like savage cavemen. I mean, while they're dragging their knuckles around on the ground and trying to strangle individual Jedi, Plagueis was messing with the galactic order and economy and then playing derivatives on the side and making bank off of that. I mean, he clearly figured out everything. Every other Sith before him had tried to meet force with greater force, and their efforts would always end in failure. Plagueis understood that in order to have true power in a galaxy-wide economy, one simply had to build a lot of capital. Most other Sith Lords, dumber Sith Lords, would have seen such material things as below them. But they failed to understand that for almost every other being in the galaxy, credits were as powerful of a persuader as the Force itself. And so Darth Plagueis would use the shadowy lobbying company known as Damas Holdings to essentially spread out a network across the entire galaxy. He would control businesses, politicians, and various assets that could basically allow him to change anything he wanted, anywhere he wanted in the Republic. And he could do this all without revealing himself. Plagueis would also use these secret entities to create tension and chaos in the Outer Rim areas by funding certain type of agitator groups or defunding certain public sectors. This would eventually lead to the Clone Wars, and at the same time he would train Darth Sidious, aka Palpatine, to become the Chancellor of the Republic and the public face of their plan to seize control of the galaxy. Of course, Palpatine, as per Sith tradition, would just murder Darth Plagueis and take over the plan himself. Now, during the Clone Wars, Palpatine had direct access and control over the Confederacy of Advanced Systems, which was being headed by his own apprentice, Count Dooku. The Jedi-turned-Sith Lord had command over several of the largest Outer Rim corporations that we mentioned before. When the Clone Wars ended, Palpatine was able to quickly murder all of these leaders and essentially seize the assets of these companies for his own new empire. I mean, this is the real change that the Empire brought about. It wasn't just about controlling the individual through totalitarian and authoritarian means. Those tendencies took time to build up and needed its own infrastructure that needed to be set up. But what Palpatine did overnight was nationalize several large corporations, natural assets, and planets, and basically enrolled them all into the public sector. These newly publicly aligned companies and assets would have one purpose only, and that was to provide cheap goods, cheap labor, and cheap materials for the newly created Imperial military. And from what I can tell, an organization like the Preox Morlana Authority was most likely a corporation that either pledged its loyalty to the Empire, like the Mining Guild, or was just nationalized and now functioned as a part of the ruling authority. Palpatine didn't really care either way. He just wanted to get rid of the local authorities that could potentially rebel against him, and he wanted to replace them with his own strongmen. In a lot of cases, these were corporations that were completely loyal to him. As a matter of fact, one of the first political moves that Palpatine did was to appoint governors to each sector of the Empire. Followed by that, he would appoint Moffs, which were kind of like bigger governors. I think starting off the Andor series with a corporation as the major villain is really awesome, because As we've seen in the prequels and the Plagueis novel, which in my opinion is one of the most important legendary novels out there, you guys should definitely check that out if you want to learn more about how the Sith set up the galaxy for failure. I think it's great that we're seeing these corporations, because that's actually a huge part on how the Empire operated and how Emperor Palpatine took power. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed our little foray into this villainous organization. Let me know in the comment section below what else you guys want to learn about the new Andor TV series. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.